Email, I want to say last year around this time. Right. Bob, you go then. Sure. Okay. Yeah, we got roll it. I lost track of it. It's too much. What do you think? Full time. Yeah, right. Did you know this being a full time?
No, I kind of just skimmed through it yesterday, wrote down, no, like I read it, but like, I wrote down things that I thought were important.
It is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then know it was all just like satire.
Yeah.
Misleading. Oh, makes fun though. Sure. All right, the Oracle's Confederation. What do we know about it? What do we know about it? Zara, go ahead. Yeah, good job. Good. So ideally, with a government, you'd like it obviously pretty small, right? Limited government, which that's the foundations of our own constitution and our government today. Somewhat. All right. So with that, the Argos Confederation was very weak, right? At first, ideally, you wanted to give the powers to the states, okay? And you didn't want this overarching national government, which everybody could agree on. But quickly, founding fathers realized that this wasn't going to work, right? You needed to have some sort of unity here. You needed to have some sort of national government to pretty much wield in the states so that they don't act against one another, so that they don't act like their own sovereign nations, right? And at first, that's what was happening, right? A lot of states were doing a lot of economic harm to one another. They're even reaching out and forming trade with other countries. And it really caused a lot of ripples, a lot of problems, a lot of issues. So in other words, the Argos Confederation just was very weak, right? One of the biggest things, no taxation power, that was a problem. And when you think about taxes, yeah, we don't hate to pay it, sure, but they do provide a lot of benefits to the people. When it comes to maintaining social order, wait a minute, functions of government, remember chapter 1? Public services, right? So when it comes to providing transportation, for providing roads, bridges, infrastructure, school, education, right? Certain healthcare, okay? You can talk about economic decisions, okay? Making sure that when it comes to interest rates, when it comes to government's involvement during a time of recession or depression, right? How this fluctuates here and there. Making sure monopolies don't become too big, you name it. And then finally, one of the biggest ones was national defense, right? If you don't have taxes, you don't have military, right? If you don't have the military, how are you gonna protect yourself? You can't. So is this country gonna really stand the test of time? If you don't have any of that? No, it's not. So the articles, well, it was very weak. All right, real quick, here are your terms for today. Here are your terms. I only have two of them for you. And one of them is the Articles of Confederation. First one, Confederation, and then unicameral legislature. All right, so as we start in chapter 2, we're gonna roll through these terms. Again, it's the foundation, the origins of American government. And you're probably thinking, well, I learned about this already. I'm good, I'm good. Well, it's important to know it because you'd be surprised. Right? A lot of people just don't really understand just the origins, the basics of our government. And I think we found out that with the citizenship test, right? Remember that video I showed you, Jay Leno? Man. And if that ever happens to you down the line, you want to make sure you're knowledgeable of it. And let's face it, it is important to know the foundation of it. So when it comes to certain policies, ideas of politicians, you can look back and reference it off of what our nation was actually founded on. So with this chapter, I'm going to break it apart then. I'll talk about the Constitution in a separate chapter because there's a lot to it, obviously. So this one, I'm going to talk about the origins of our government. And then the next chapter, I'm going to focus on the Constitution. So then we can break apart a bit. Okay. We can talk about the amendments, talk about the amendment process. We mentioned about the preamble, the goals, the principles of the Constitution. Again, I just didn't want to overload you with it. Um, Yar's not back yet, but go ahead. Just want to fill out Bass. Yep. Yeah, I guess. Go ahead, Azar. Yep. All right, so these terms, Confederation, okay, is a bond between many different states in this case, right? The colonies and then the states. And their goal is to make sure that it has some sort of uniformity, that they can come together and solve some disputes when need be. What's up? Oh, okay.
Letting you finish.
All right, thank you. All right, so the Articles of Confederation, biggest thing to know is that it failed, right? It didn't really work out. And one of the biggest reasons here, we'll talk about 6 weaknesses of the articles and what leads to our Constitution, what leads to our government that we know it today. All right, so form a confederation. Obviously, when it comes to America, we had to fight a revolution, right? We had to fight for independence. Who did we defeat again? Citizenship test, here we go. Who did we defeat in a revolutionary war? Oh boy. Canaan? Yeah, Great Britain, good job. Anyway, so with that, the states pretty much did their own thing, right? All the states had their own form of currency. When it comes to their economics, it was totally different when you think about the southern states to the northern, to the mid-Atlantic, right? And they all dealt situations differently. Okay, so the Confederation All right, where we see the Articles Confederation, all these states banded together for a common purpose. Right, the purpose was to make sure that they could decide on certain matters when it comes to foreign relations, when it comes to maybe building up a military, which at the time, they kind of did things with a militia, right? And to fight off a lot of the groups that are still there, like the Native Americans for protection. All right. So when it comes to the Articles Confederation, the idea was to try to keep the principles of the states while still having some unity. Seems difficult. And again, they just got done fighting this Revolutionary War against a tyrannical government, so they said, of Great Britain. So they didn't want a strong national government, right? They didn't want this federal government that had too much power. Because again, they just fought to get away from that. So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, which we'll explain more with the weaknesses here. All right, so the Continental Congress created the Articles of Confederation. And the biggest thing here is creating a central government. That wasn't too strong, right? Again, they wanted to make sure that this thing was weak, but tied the states together, that they could solve disputes, protect the nation, and to make sure that they had trade set up and established with other countries. All right, so another goal here of the Articles was protect state sovereignty, meaning that the states could do whatever they wanted within their own boundaries. That these states almost act like mini nations in a way to adhere to their people's demands. Right, so Pennsylvania, for instance, what were we? What were we? They call it an experiment. What kind of experiment was this? Anybody? Mr. Henninger's class? No? Reagan, you're taking it now.
Wait, what did you ask?
Pennsylvania is the what experiment?
The whole.
Yes, the holy experiment, good. So that people of other different religions could come together and embrace the state, Pennsylvania, for what it is, right? Where you can have religious freedom, right? The Quakers, right? With William Penn, and then they could live amongst the Native Americans even. But the biggest thing was religion, religious freedom, right? So when it comes to state sovereignty, right, a lot of states had different interests in mind. Virginia was pretty much founded on what? What trade? What was your big cash crop early on? What was it? Smoking what? I'm recording here, Yari. Yo, all right. Tobacco. Yeah, good. Tobacco, good. So when it comes to certain colonies, I know with Virginia, the Virgin Queen Elizabeth I, but yeah, cash crops like tobacco. And then eventually, right, we got indigo, we got cotton. A lot of these states start to develop over what they have to offer. So yeah, anyway, they set up one house legislature, meaning it's a unicameral, right? So one of your terms was a unicameral legislature, meaning one house. Right? What kind of system do we have today? We have a one house legislature or two. It's a bicameral or unicameral. Yeah, bicameral, good job. So we got a House of Representatives, we got a Senate. Right, back then it was just one house, one house. So you can see how some of the disputes might bring out. Right, you might have some states that have, let's say, a bigger population that really don't get their say in what happens at the national level. And that's going to play a factor when we get to some of these plans, like the Virginia plan and the New Jersey plan. Now there needs to be compromise. All right, powers of Congress, very limited. Again, powers that they did have was control the army, which, again, you don't have taxes. Can you raise an army? No, you can't. So you might as well cross that one out. Address foreign relations. Well, who's going to really adhere to that? If the federal government's really weak, who's going to listen? Really don't. Right? The states did their own discussions, their own diplomacy with other countries. So that was kind of strange. And when it comes to states doing this, well, they're going to act in their own interests. And we'll talk about tariffs. We'll talk about other trade, unequal trade amongst the states, which cause a lot of tension. All right, make sure you guys note this. I'm going to go down, break down each one. But there are 6 major problems with the Articles of Confederation. Number 1, no taxation power. Right? Again, one of the biggest issues, if you don't have taxes, I know no one likes to pay them, but they do provide roads, bridges, infrastructure when it comes to transportation. When it comes to education, school, yeah, it's important. When it comes to raising a military, you need it. When it comes to maintaining social order, like a police force, you need it, right? So when it comes to taxes, they do provide a lot for the people. Again, no life to pay it, I get that. And when it comes to the foundation of our country, no taxation without representation, right? That's a big part of it. All right, obviously, a lot of the taxes on the stamps, when it comes to tea, when it comes to other taxes that England was putting down on the colonies here in America, they're over it, but you needed them? All right, so we'll see that struggle here too, when the government starts to impose taxes on the people. You gotta imagine, people are not gonna be for it whatsoever. All right, no national court, meaning no judicial branch. Cut that out. So who's gonna solve the disputes amongst the states? No one, right? No one. So if you're from Pennsylvania, right, or I say Pennsylvania is having some issues with trade with New York or Virginia. Well, there's no one there to solve the problem. So that's gonna be a big concern. All right, no currency standard. So each state had their own form of money, own currency. Well, how do you know with inflation? How do you know what the worth of a dollar, price of a dollar is compared to another state? That's a big issue. That's a big problem. When you go travel across state borders, okay, you gotta try to, you gotta transfer your currency over to that state's currency. It's gonna be almost impossible to do. What if, let's say, one state prints out so much of their money, right, which Rhode Island did? They thought, hey, if we just print out more money, that means people are gonna be rich, right? Right? Now, what happens to the worth of that dollar? It goes down, right? So that's a big issue. That's a big problem. And when you do cross state lines, well, it's not like that's gonna be equal to, let's say, Pennsylvania's dollars. You gotta try to transfer that. Obviously, in today's world, international level, right, we have computers that tell us instantly, right, what that inflation rate might be, what our dollar is compared to other countries. Back then, how do you figure that out? You really can't, so it's a problem. All right, no executive, meaning no president. Why do you think they didn't want an executive branch? Why do you think they didn't want one leader? Well, they just got done with King George, right? You think they wanted a king? No, right? Even if it was called a president, they didn't want that. So no executive branch either. All right, no interstate commerce regulation. So when it comes to the government, it wasn't like that they were controlling the state's trade, right? So when it comes to trade, it was a lot of times tariff taxed by the other state. So this is where you got a lot of issues between state borders, state lines, state economics, right? So for instance, Pennsylvania, yeah, we did our own farming of tobacco too, but Virginia was known for their tobacco. So in other words, when you think about markets, okay, if you're Virginia, obviously you're known for this cash crop. You're gonna sell this out in the market, right? Let's say you're trying to sell this here to Pennsylvania, people in Pennsylvania. Right, if you're Pennsylvania, do you want people buying tobacco that's created in Virginia? Do you? No, you don't. You want people to buy your tobacco. This is just an example. So what do you think they did? The people of Pennsylvania, the people that controlled these markets in Pennsylvania, what do you think they did with the Virginia tobacco? They put a tariff on it, right? So these tariffs were like a hidden tax, right? So as they were sold in Pennsylvania, right, you look at tobacco from PA, let's say it's $1, right? Let's just say that, $1. Then you see the Virginia tobacco, and then that's all of a sudden $1.50. Right? Which one are you gonna buy? The cheaper one, right? So in other words, these states started to compete against one another and putting tariffs on these goods. They try to screw them over. It was economic warfare. And all of a sudden, these states didn't really see eye to eye. If they're not seeing eye to eye, are they ever gonna come together? Let's say if a country tries to invade them? No. So that's a big problem. And so even just the smallest thing here, I won't call it small, but trade, right? How that could raise tensions among states to a point where it could lead to really darn damning things. Right? Maybe a civil war, who knows? So, yeah, this commerce needs to be figured out. The national government needs to have a little bit more power in these situations. You just can't tariff these goods from another state because you want people to buy your own goods. Now, internationally, you see it a lot, right? President Trump's been doing that quite a bit, right? Tariffs on imported goods because he wants more businesses to come back to the United States. That's a different thing. Obviously, that's the federal government. That's where we kind of hash things out here early on, where we have this power. For the people. All right, last thing, each state had veto power over amendments, okay? When it came to passing laws or legislation, you needed 9 of the 13 states to agree. Are you gonna ever get that? No, probably not. If you wanted to change this whole system of government from the Articles of Confederation, you needed 13 of the 13 to agree. Think you're ever gonna get that? No, and they actually did change this without one of the states' agreement, which is kind of crazy. That's like breaking the law already, right? But in any case, this is just doomed to fail from the beginning. All right, the next slides, we're just going into detail about this. Are you guys good? I just gave you examples, so I think we're all on. Are there any questions? Good? Olivia? All right. Anyway, so these are the 6 issues, problems of the Articles of Confederation. And the founding fathers looked at this and said, ooh, this isn't working. We need to have a better system. We need a government that's more representative of the people and where we can have a little bit more power for the federal government, which a lot of people during the time were not pleased with, not pleased, which is going to be a struggle. All right. There we go.